There is a door at the end of a dark staircase in an old Connecticut mansion, and it opens inward. Not outward, the way normal doors do, but inward, and carved deep into its surface are long, jagged scratch marks, not on the inside where you might expect them, but on the outside, as if something on the other side was desperately trying to push its way in. I know what you're thinking. That doesn't make any sense. And you are absolutely right. It doesn't. But what I found behind that door will stay with me for the rest of my life. Welcome to the Fear Sermon. I'm so glad you're here. And if this is your first time joining us, please take a second right now to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know, and it makes sure you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's go back to Millbridge, Connecticut, and to a house that should have been left alone. The house stood at the end of Darling Street, a Victorian mansion built in 1887 by a man named Horace Wentworth. Tall iron gates, wrap-around porch. The kind of place that makes you feel like it's watching you before you even step through the front door. My name is Eleanor Wentworth, and on a damp October morning in 1973, I inherited it. I did not ask for it. I did not want it. But the moment my boots hit that creaking porch and my hand touched the cold brass doorknob, I understood that this house had been waiting for me. Specifically for me. Inside, the floorboards whispered underfoot. Shadows pooled in the corners like water. The air smelled of old leather and burnt candle wax. My cousin Harold met me at the base of the grand staircase. Pale, nervous, with dark eyes that never quite settled anywhere for long. He told me no one had lived here for nearly 30 years. That the family fortune had dried up, and the town's whispers about this place had only grown louder over the decades. Stories of madness, of disappearances, of something in the basement that no one would name out loud. And then he glanced at the basement door. Just once. But that one glance told me everything. The door was at the end of a narrow hallway, painted a chipped and peeling white. What stopped me cold were the scratch marks. Long, deep, frantic gouges in the wood. But here's the thing that made my stomach drop. They were on the outside of the door. Whatever made those marks wasn't trying to get out. It was trying to get in. And when I pointed that out to Harold, his face went white. He told me the basement had been sealed since 1945. Since the disappearance of my great-uncle Nathaniel Wentworth, a chemist and a recluse who, according to family letters, had been consumed by experiments that nobody ever fully understood. The door, Harold said, was always locked. Never opened. Not by housekeepers. Not by family members. Not by anyone still breathing. My first nights in the house were the kind that make you feel like the walls are alive. Rain against the stained glass windows. Branches scraping like fingers across the outside of the house. The fireplace crackled faintly. Even though no fire burned, I felt watched. Constantly, completely watched. The neighbors in Millbridge weren't much help either. They crossed the street when they saw me coming. Their eyes said everything their mouths refused to. This town had buried its stories about the Wentworths a long time ago, and nobody wanted to dig them back up. But I did. The library on the second floor was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. I found genealogy records stretching all the way back to 1776. But when I looked for Nathaniel's page, his birth record, his marriage, anything, it was gone. Torn out. All that remained was a single scrawled note on a loose piece of paper. One word. Lost. Then I found his journal. It was wedged beneath loose floorboards in what had once been his bedroom, its cover cracked and fragile. And what was written inside made my hands shake. Nathaniel wrote about starvation, about shadows, about whispers rising up from below the house every night. He wrote about a door that only he could open. He wrote about sounds in the walls, scratching slow and rhythmic, like nails dragged across dry wood. And the further I read, the more the room seemed to tighten around me, like the house was trying to swallow his words before I could finish them. I went to the town historian, a thin, quiet man named Edmund Crowley, who kept records going back centuries. He confirmed what I had suspected. Nathaniel's experiments were not just scientific. They were occult. He had been mixing chemistry with ritual, trying to do something beneath that house that no one had ever quite been able to explain. And then he vanished. His body was reportedly found at the mill pond, drowned, though it was never recovered. A wreath of black roses arrived at the family home that same day, with a note that read only 4 words the door remembers. I spoke to an 84-year-old woman named Agnes Wilcox, who had grown up just down the street. She told me that as a child, she had heard crying coming from beneath the house, a low, desperate sobbing that twisted into scratching. She saw a shadow press against the basement window, a misshapen shape that pulled back the moment she looked at it. Her parents told her to forget it. The whole town had been telling each other to forget it for decades. And then Harold brought me something I hadn't expected. A second journal. This one belonged to Nathaniel's fiancée, a woman named Clara, who had never left the estate after his disappearance. Clara's entries described a presence beneath the floor. Something trapped behind the inward opening door. Something that called out in silence. Something that fed on the door itself. Her final entry ended mid-sentence, and the last legible line read, "It sees me, but it does not know me, and it feeds on the door I once tried to lock with my own hands." By now, the scratching had started again. Not from a memory, not from a story, from the actual door. Fresh marks. I could see them forming in the layers of paint, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was on the other side knew I was close. I found the key in a hidden drawer. It was cold in a way that metal shouldn't be cold, like it had been sitting underwater for years. When I turned it in the lock, the tumblers resisted, and then gave. The door swung inward with a groan that seemed to come not from the hinges but from the house itself. The smell hit me first: iron, burnt hair, something old and wrong. My flashlight cut through the darkness and caught the walls, covered in symbols, alchemical signs, crude drawings of jagged mouths with long teeth, star shapes that seemed to flicker when the light moved across them. These were not decorations. These were attempts to keep something contained. I went deeper, and at the far end of the basement, carved into the stone wall, was an iron grate over a shaft that descended straight down into complete darkness. The scratching was coming from inside it, a low, rhythmic clawing that echoed up through the stone like a pulse. And then a whisper, just below the edge of comprehension, like the flutter of something ancient and wrong. Then the flashlight went out. In the dark, a faint phosphorescent glow began rising from the shaft, and the scratching became urgent, frenzied, the kind of sound that bypasses your brain and goes straight to the part of you that knows. This is not safe. This is not right. Get out. The voice came next, low, guttural, but somehow pitiful. It said my name, not Eleanor, a different name, older, one I did not recognize but somehow felt in my bones. I ran. Harold was at the top of the stairs, pale, shaking. He told me something he had been keeping for years. Our bloodline, he said, was tied to this thing. Our great-grandfather Horace had made a pact with a secret occult brotherhood called the Veil of St. Aidan, a group that had been dabbling in forces they could not control. Their symbol, a twisted knot inside a pentacle, was engraved on the basement doorframe, beneath all the layers of paint. Horace had not just built this house. He had built it as a container, And when his grip on that container weakened, Nathaniel had sacrificed himself to reinforce it, becoming both warden and prisoner in one. And here is what stopped my heart. Written in faint red across the top of the door frame, barely visible in the dark, unless you pressed your face close, were the words, "This door opens inward only to keep what lies beneath contained." And then, 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. It had been mailed months earlier, from a town Nathaniel had visited before his disappearance. It was unsigned. One sentence, typed and underlined. The door was never meant to keep the past in. It keeps the future out. Whatever is beneath that house is not a ghost. It is not a monster in the traditional sense. It is something woven from the grief and madness and broken promises of every generation of my family. Something that fed on forgetting and was now being forced to remember. The scratch marks were never warnings. They were invitations. Calls to come back. Calls to remember. And the creature, if you can call it that, did not want flesh or freedom. It wanted to be acknowledged, to be seen. Because the moment a Wentworth came back to that house, the seals began to weaken. And I had walked right in. I stood at that basement door, one last time, listening to the sound of something old and wounded reaching for me from beneath the earth. And I understood, with terrible clarity, that closing the door would not fix what had already been opened. Some thresholds, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Some silences, once broken, cannot be restored. The house is still there. The door still opens inward. And the scratching, I am told, has not stopped. This has been the Fear Sermon. If this story got under your skin the way it got under mine, do me a favor right now. Drop a comment below telling me what you think was really trapped in that basement. Was it a creature? Was it Nathaniel himself? Was it something older than either of them? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what you think. And if you know someone who loves a good haunted house story, share this video with them tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Because some stories are better when you're not alone. Until next time, remember, some doors are meant to stay closed.